Good day, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jack Van Horn from the University of Virginia, and I am proud to welcome you to our final edition of our 2021-2022 Foundations of Biomedical Data Science seminar series. This lecture series has been supported by UVA's Integrated Translational Health Institute of Virginia, the UVA Brain Institute, the College of Arts and Sciences, the School of Data Science, and through grants from the National Institutes of General Medical Sciences. This year's theme has been Ethical Challenges of Artificial Intelligence in Biomedicine, where we have enjoyed presentations on Fridays from leading thinkers about the promise, opportunities, and the hurdles associated with AI applications in the biomedical sciences. Selected participants in our Biomedical Data Science Innovation Lab program have been able to leverage these presentations as vital material for our culminating in-person grant project development workshop to be held here next month in Charlottesville, Virginia. I am delighted to welcome our speaker today and the final speaker of our series, Dr. Brian Wright from the School of Data Science here at the University of Virginia. Dr. Wright is one of our 2021-2022 Biomedical Data Science Innovation Lab mentors, and he serves currently as an assistant professor and the director of undergraduate programs at the University of Virginia's School of Data Science. He holds degrees from the University of Tennessee, including a Ph.D. in higher education and higher education administration, and an MPA in public administration, and a Bachelor of Science in economics. Prior to joining the University of Virginia in 2019, Dr. Wright developed the Masters of Data Science program at George Washington University, where he taught for several years. And while at George Washington, he founded their Data Science Institute and helped to develop the creation of a joint PhD in education and in data science. Dr. Wright began his career with the Department of Defense as a management consultant and researcher with a focus on enterprise resource planning and conversion. In continuing our 2021-22 Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series, Brian's lecture today is entitled Instilling Diversity into a Data Science Undergraduate Curriculum. Dr. Wright will discuss with us the process of helping to build the very first School of Data Science in the country, and this will include the necessity of developing an agreed upon definition of data science, instilling diversity into an undergraduate program, and providing opportunities to shape education in data science as a field that is inclusive, diverse, and exciting and forward-thinking. In his lecture, he will also include specific examples that have proven effective in other STEM-oriented fields, and we're really looking forward to his lecture. As always, we are streaming this lecture live and for recording via YouTube. And if you were watching on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. Also, our specially selected 2021 Biomedical Data Science Innovation Lab participants are encouraged to submit any questions for Brian via the chat feature in their Zoom sessions, and I will synthesize these and ask them on your behalf during the last 10 minutes or so of the lecture. And with that, welcome, Brian. We are really looking forward to your lecture.
Great. Thanks so much for the kind words and introduction, Jack. I'll just jump right into it here. This is the title. We're going to talk about creating a diverse undergraduate bachelor's of data science. This is me. I guess we already did most of this, so I'll just jump kind of to the next slide here. I want to foreground this with, I don't assume to have all of the answers. This is a very complicated space. There's lots of solutions, so sometimes the best way to prove that they work is to actually implement them. And so we're going to look through some research that has done just that, but I'm going to hit some key highlights that I think are pretty important. And the context behind this, which I think is important to have, is that we are actually in the process, and Jack knows this very well because he's on my committee that's helping me do this, is that we are in the process of developing the undergraduate Bachelor of Science here at the School of Data Science at UVA. So this will be the first undergraduate full degree inside the school. So we have kind of a nice opportunity to think about exactly what we want it to look like and to instill some of these best practices that we know from research can really help in terms of just getting diversity and keeping that diversity in the school in forms of retention. So I got about 6 points to cover. All right, I'll try and go through some of them. Some of them will be a bit more in depth. And like I said, I don't assume to have all the answers here, but these are ones that I have either implemented in the past or have kind of taken a look at through other research avenues that we know that work. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So the first thing, and I know this has been covered a lot, but like the way that I think about this, what is data science? I'm not gonna try and frame it. But what I do want people to think of it as for this point of this talk is that it really is kind of this once in a generation, maybe even more, right, opportunity. So I can contextualize what that means here at the School of Data Science at UVA, given we were the first one in the country. But even more broadly than that, you don't get that many opportunities when we think about the life cycle of academic endeavors to actually build a new field, right? Especially a new STEM field. So when we think about data science, we can all debate about whether that's the content of how much CS or stats, but I think really what it represents, especially for the context of this conversation, is just this amazing opportunity to say to ourselves, how can we build a culture in a field that, you know, kind of sets aside some of the ills that we have with current STEM education, we know, in terms of the ways that people get into it, or the retention rates, or the diversity measures there. So we really have this amazing, you know, kind of, you know, once in a lifetime, possibly opportunity to do that. And so that's the context for this. So I want you to think about it that way as we kind of move through this. And I have some foregrounding slides here. I'll just talk about kind of the rapid growth of data science. You know, we talk about, we're kind of beginning to define it. It was largely built pretty much in the master space, right? So we have this chart here from the Advanced Analytics Center there at North Carolina State. And they just show here that the rapid, you know, kind of the incredible growth of data science programs in the United States, you know, kind of beginning right down here in the mid, you know, 2010s. And then now we're way up here, you know, pushing, you know, 350 programs, almost all of which are in the graduate space. And the particular slide is in the graduate space. So the next kind of frontier for data science is largely in the undergraduate space. There are some PhD programs. Those have a tendency to be a bit more specialized. But what we see now in relation to this trend is that likely this type of chart will be duplicated probably for the 2020s, but in the undergraduate space. There are many, many programs, at least I talked to other program directors around the country, or other schools and other associations that we're involved with, and they're all thinking about developing undergraduate programs. And so we have kind of this, we're at this unique point here when we think about how we, you know, have STEM education and undergraduate as a foundation of people moving through and getting PhDs in these particular fields and increasing diversity to really take advantage of it, because we're on kind of the front end of this curve. So that's kind of the foreground, at least for the undergraduate space. All right, this is just another chart there showing the number of students that have graduated. I think we're pushing cumulative numbers over 50,000 now in terms of just graduate data science degrees that have been awarded. All right. Oh, and this is just a fun chart. I want to show this. This is a variety. Of course, it's actually in my, just kind of, it's a kind of a biased sample here, but this is a distribution of majors in my machine learning undergraduate course. And you can see here, and I think this is, you know, for the context of this, nice to see that there are neuroscience, we have biomedical engineering, but the point here is that we have a variety of majors, everything from English and economics, heavily, a lot of computer science here, but a lot of students in a lot of different undergraduate majors really interested in data science. And these are students that are declared for the data science minor here at UVA, of which we have about 300. And this is just a sample from just my undergraduate class of about 60 students where they're coming from. So this kind of mirrors this idea that not only do, you know, could we see this potential really large growth, but also that we're going to see, you know, a lot of interest from a lot of variety of different degrees, right? And this could be analogous to a lot of variety of different types of students. So again, kind of a nice point in time to think about what is a data science undergraduate degree, and what are the best practices that we can create and support in order to make sure that that's a healthy STEM environment. All right. So to continue to foreground here, we've seen a lot of growth in STEM. You know, I think some of this is actually a bit underestimated, but, you know, since 1990 to 2019 here, we've seen it basically double. You know, it's about 30% of all the degrees conferred in the United States right now, right? But we still have some issues with STEM in terms of just diversity generally. You know, we think about centering on women. Here, there was a share of STEM that grew over the same period from 32 to 34 over this 10-year period. That's not much growth in consideration of the total population of women that have gone to school over that same period of time. And then here we see that there's some performance measures that are different between students that are actually in bachelor's degrees in data science or bachelor's degrees in STEM at 44% that actually make it into workforce positions there. There's probably lots of reasons for that. But I think a big reason that we might be concerned relative to this is that there appears to be a proportion of skilled technical workforce that's been totally unchanged, right, over 10 years. And so if we dig a little bit deeper into this, the distribution of women in bachelor's degrees in STEM is also a bit skewed, right? Actually pretty heavily skewed towards life sciences or social sciences. And the ones that are probably most analogous, right, to data science are probably these three, right? So physical science, but especially computer science and engineers. So when we think of the percentage of distribution of women in STEM fields here, and this is all from 2019, pretty low in terms of computer and mathematical sciences, and then also engineers. So we have, again, kind of an opportunity here to do things a bit better, try to balance this out, especially in consideration that women now make up a majority of the total enrollments in higher education. We dig a little bit deeper here. We see these same problems. There seems to be some, kind of misrepresentation of Blacks, Hispanics, and American Indians and Alaskan Natives. They make up about 30% of the total population, but only 20% of the STEM workforce. All right, so they're largely underrepresented. And this comes out of that same National Science Foundation kind of report about why the reasons for this that might occur, and that they're kind of driving force through this publication here was about the need to create a better pipeline for STEM workers, especially as it relates to getting them access to bachelor's degrees or higher education generally. All right. So this, again, I guess to overemphasize this point, this is the distribution across different racial groups here in terms of just people receiving, all right, science and engineering degrees in 2019. You see here that there's a pretty disproportionate percentage associated with Hispanics as it relates to associate degrees as compared to bachelor's degrees. And you can compare that to where we're sitting for the white population of students. It's also true for Black and the other minorities that are here, all right? So it seems like they're getting into these associate degree programs, right? But that proportion doesn't necessarily carry over, all right, into the bachelor's degrees, which we know is linked to kind of the most workforce success and creates a foundation for all sorts of other things in terms of just a healthy society of people coming up and being able to contribute to the scientific community, all right? All right, so this is actually in spite of a rather significant investment in STEM education from the federal government. All right, so the Congressional Research Service, that estimates that the federal government spends about $3.1 billion just in STEM education programs. These aren't STEM-related grants or supporting of research. That's just STEM education programs, and that's adjusted for inflation between the periods of 2010 and 2020. So that's a lot. That's I didn't have to do that for you. That's $31 billion over the last decade of investment in STEM education programs, a lot of which was designed to increase diversity and create these pathways. And we've seen from the previous slides that have marginal effects at best. So we have to think of ways that maybe we can improve this. All right. And there's just fun facts here. The UN estimated that 30 billion will actually solve the global food crisis. All right. So that's an important note just in scale of what $30 billion can do. You could hire 500,000 new public school teachers with that money. And then the last one, kind of less fun, I guess, that's not enough to buy Twitter. So sorry, Elon. Okay, but $30 billion, quite a lot of money. All right, so let's talk about ways that we can design undergraduate programs that we know have proven based off research. And I'll talk about how we're thinking about implementing that as we're developing this new undergraduate program here at UVA. So the first way is to have multiple pathways and to minimize competitive nature of these programs. I know that can sound antithetical, but the idea here is basically to be high flex, to provide lots of ways to come into the program and then let competition occur once they're in, not before. All right. Doesn't mean that we reduce the rigor or the quality of these programs. We still want them to be very high, but we want to be able to be flexible to try and get students in. And then once they're in, providing the necessary supports, and then maintain that level of rigor that we know is necessary for learning, right? So I'm going to talk, there's a lot to talk about here, but given the time that we have, I'm going to try and focus on first the relationships with two-year schools, and then I'll touch some of these other ones when we think about just multiple pathways in. The relationships with two-year schools tends to be a really important one. All right, so this is from the American Association of Community Colleges. They put out this infographic here. There's to highlight some of the facts here associated with this. You'll see that the diversity measures associated with students coming in to two-year degrees over here tends to be quite a bit higher than we see as kind of national, not actually that much more, but quite a bit, at least in terms of just the number of students there, certainly larger. And then we all think about other demographics of first-generation students that are in community colleges. It's a bit hard to read, but down here, this number in particular, that's about 30%. Some of them are single parents. Add those together, right? So 30% is much larger than the national average for first-generation students, which is around 20. So there's a significant portion of first-generation students and minority students that go into two-year schools, right? Which is makes it an important avenue for us to understand and create pathways with into four-year degrees. So having relationships with two-year schools in order to be able to encourage diversity is significant. And there's some facts over here on the side, all right, that among African-American or Black students that graduate with a GPA of 3.5 or higher, 33% of them attend a community college. That's a high number, right? That's closer to 22% for white or Caucasian. So we can see this can really be an important thing to consider when we're talking about creating pathways into four-year programs to encourage diversity, all right? This is just to give you an idea of the total number of 2 years from the same institution here. And so we can see that over time, we've had kind of steady increases in the number of enrollments in education generally. 4 year, we're up here around 10 million, all right? But a significant portion of that, all right, maybe close to, I think it's 45%, something like that, is in 2 year programs, all right? We've seen actually a pretty big drop in this over time in COVID. The pandemic didn't make this much better. When it's fluctuations in terms of economic realities or a global pandemic, usually 2 year schools are the ones that suffer the most because the students that enroll in those are forced to do other things besides attend school. But we can see here that it does make up a significant portion of the total population of those attending post-primary education programs. All right, so relationships with 2 year schools. I want to highlight some things here too about what I mean by that. All right, so really what I'm talking about is developing, at least this is kind of what the educational research will tell us, is that a lot of what restrict students from understanding what they can do after they're done with their 2 year program is actually their ability to have access to that information, right? To understand that there are these transfer programs, all right, that they can talk to counselors, they can be admitted into 4 year programs, there's direct admits. So a lot of that understanding of the world of possibilities is encapsulated with this idea about social capital, is that minority students, first generation students especially, don't have the same amount of social capital that students that come from parents that have gone through this process or have bachelor's degrees, right, or even higher. They just don't have relationships that allow them to understand what the potential options are and advantages, right, of going from 2 year to 4 year. And so Vincent Tinto was the original framework of this, and he associated social capital with kind of educational isolation, right? And he was the one who created an original framework about how this can lead to dropout rates and retention turnover year over year in 4 year degrees. And so his idea about there's essentially that dropout is very similar to social isolation, and that is akin to kind of this lack of social capital that students have on campus. And that can come in the representation of peers or faculty members or family members. There's the idea that is a significant contributor, and there's now a huge body of research. He did this back actually started in the 80s, but a huge body of research to support this idea about kind of how right, social capital can make a huge difference in terms of students having success across the board. All right. There's much of studies that show that this type of social capital can be gained through peer and faculty engagement. All right. These are some examples here. All right. So this particular article kind of did a lot of interviews across 23 different institutions. All right. And it found that especially in the Latino community, there was a significant difference between students that successfully navigated through the community college and on to 4 year degrees that had strong relationships with their adult males, right, in their family that did the same thing, or male faculty members that helped them kind of understand what the pathways were, right? So there were some significant differences there. That's one example, right? And this is an example for some work that I did earlier that's associated with this, that there was a significant difference in terms of engagement and peer mentorship as it relates to social capital for first-generation students when compared to non-first-generation students in terms of their level of success on campus. All right, so what we see here, and there's lots of, like I said, studies that support this, is that this type of designing programs and starting to understand what it means to develop this social capital for students to facilitate, it can really make a difference in terms of how students are transitioning or being successful through this 2-year to 4-year pipeline. All right. This is another one that was especially relevant here that talked about, community college across California, that they reviewed 42 community colleges. And what they did is they worked and created recommendations about how to create programs at 4-year institutions that could essentially allow students of African-American descent to gain more social capital in the forms of building relationships with existing institutions in order to be able to reduce that student equity gap in terms of their transition out of community college into 4-year institutions. Okay. There's a link here. I think for the sake of time, I probably won't click on it, but there are lots of transfer success programs, right, that are making actually a pretty huge difference. This particular site has a few of them on there. There's actually several in Virginia. They're from George Mason, Virginia Tech, and VCU. UVA has ones as well, especially as it relates to its to the college at Wise. And so the idea is that a lot of these transfer programs are kind of giving boots on the ground, going out to the community colleges and talking about how students can transfer, the pipelines, the requirements for that, and then even going further to match them with peer mentors that have done that process, right? That are successfully transferred and are doing well in the academic environment in that college. And that can make huge differences. We'll dive a little bit more into that, but not just giving them a flyer and saying, hey, these are the opportunities, but actually allowing them to connect with people that have successfully done it and really kind of rely on them to provide advice. Can make a big difference. Okay. Other ways that we talk about kind of, multiple pathways in and out of the degree. That's one that, from 2-year schools in particular is an important one when we think about kind of injecting diversity. But also inside the program, the way that we've designed it is that we do have a minor, which is essentially the first 4 classes that students would take in the major. So that if they're not sure that they want to do a data science major, they can start with a minor and then they can build credits, see if it's a right fit for them. And if it is, then they can jump into the program. It turns out that they come into the data science minor or data science major, and it is not right for them. All right. One thing that they can do is they can leave with a credential and get the minor, right? So after the first year, if they just think, hey, this isn't right for me, then they don't lose those credits, so to speak, right? They can off ramp out of the major and still receive the minor, then move on to something maybe that might be more, connected to their personal interests. The other thing that we're making sure to do is that we're connecting it with the other liberal arts requirements on campus. So again, that these students aren't losing credits as they go through our program, that they can take these credits if they decide to stay or even double major is a big thing, that they won't lose those credits. There's a lot of information and studies relative to credit accumulation and student success. So both of these are related to making sure that students don't fall behind if they happen to change their plans while on grounds. And they can still, accumulate credits at would be a appropriate rate for them to graduate within 4 years. All right, we're also going to have multiple application periods. This is kind of akin to what we just talked about with on and off. We are going to allow for one-time first admissions, just direct admit. They'll apply to UVA. If you get into UVA, then you can say that, hey, I'd like to be a data science major, and then you'd start that, all right, after your first year. We're going to have a much larger admissions period after that first year. That's going to be typically most students will come on grounds, start to take some prerequisites, and then apply over the summer, and then the transfer, just like I talked about, either internal or external. The important part of that is to develop those relationships with the 2-year schools and then match the courses so they can transfer over as many credits as possible. And then we will have +1 programs. So eventually, once the master's program kind of changes a little bit, so we will allow students to go through the undergraduate and then just get a 1-year master's. All right. So students can envision themselves moving through even into graduate school as an important precedent to student success. Okay, incentives. Okay, so I have three things to talk about here. So incentives is broadly defined, but these are incentives really for us as program managers to make sure that we're tracking, tracking certain elements of the diversity of our student pool, that we're hitting certain targets. So we have to build these things in right from the beginning. Otherwise, kind of trying to inject them into the culture later can be quite difficult. So incentives mean, what are the incentives for us to make sure that we're doing this on a regular basis throughout the life of this program and not just thinking about it kind of ad hoc. So one way that we can do that, and again, Jack is familiar with these because he's been very involved in this, but is to build in requirements for diversity into the actual evaluation of the program that we will send to the state regulating body. So we just foreground it up front and say, hey, that we're, we want to match the diversity of the populations here at UVA. We say that because that is the population which we are restricted to. We hope to influence that to make it more diverse as the stool starts to come up and becomes more attractive. But we are constrained to the students that are here. So we want to make sure to match or exceed the kind of existing demographics at UVA. And here we have HUGS is defined as historically underrepresented groups. We have a pretty broad definition of what that means, but we want that 6-year graduation rate to be at 95%. And then down here at the bottom too, at this last one, all right, that I've just highlighted a few of these there. And these are on all the metrics that we're using. These are kind of the ones that we're building into the actual governing documents that we're sending to the state. But I think it's important to put these in here just to make sure that we get it right from the beginning. Okay, so robust measures for student success. This includes not just how are they doing in terms of just, kind of rote GPA, but also matching it to learning outcomes and engagement. So engagement can play a huge factor, and we know through probably pushing 30 years of research now that engagement is directly related to self-efficacy and student performance, and even postgraduate student success in the broadest sense. So engagement is really about how involved they are with the university community, which is again linked to Tinto's model associated with dropout rates, that the higher they are engaged with the university, the better they do across the board on all sorts of different things. So it's important for us to think about, when we're measuring student success, to not just think about it as how many students are passing, similar to what we just showed on the previous slide, but to be kind of all encompassing about that. All right. So there's lots of research here that kind of supports that, to show that there's a strong correlation between thinking about student engagement and success very broadly. This one measure here is kind of a holistic measurement approach that includes not only GPA or credit accumulation, but also the level of engagement, right? So the more you measure a thing, especially as they found in this particular article here, is that there was a pretty big differential between students that showed high levels of engagement in terms of self-efficacy and self-esteem, and that related directly towards higher student performance. So they're measuring these two things continuously, all right? And this is a meta study that tried to look and just to quantify a bit better based off all the years of research we put into this. Is this actually true that engagement can lead to achievement? They went across 70 studies here, 200,000 participants, and they found that there were pretty strong connections between achievement and high levels of engagement, all right, across all of these studies. So we know this to be true, and so it's important when you think about designing the program, is that we think about student success as broadly as possible. All right. So we also need systematic processes for student feedback. All right. So we need to engage students in their own learning and provide avenues for them to provide, honest feedback, especially as we're just starting to build this. We want to understand what works and what doesn't, and it actually increases engagement, right? So akin to what I just talked about in the previous slide, anything that we can do to further engage students in their own learning increases their own self-confidence, right? And it helps to retain minority and first-generation students, all right? All right, the next point here is that students really need to see themselves in the degree, all right? So what I mean by that is that it's important for Black students to see Black professors, for Hispanic students to see Hispanic professors, for women to see themselves in the professors that are looking back at them, all right? And it's not just professors, it's teaching assistants or alumni speakers, or even certain case studies, right, that we use in class, right? And another thing that this can manifest in is upper level students participating in the early career of the more junior students, all right? So get students involved with students and thinking about how to match them up in terms of race and ethnic and background matching, we know can make a significant difference in student performance, and in particular retention, right? I want to highlight this one because I've got some additional points that I'm going to talk about, later in the presentation about how this one in particular works, all right? So here, all right, this is just some research that shows this, all right, in terms of just seeing themselves in the degree. All right, this study here was a greater faculty diversity. It led to significant increases in the outcomes of students, especially as it related to African-American students, in terms of them just matching and seeing themselves in the degree. All right, so this was one that was done at higher education institutions. It seems like it was a very good predictor of GPA and overall graduation if students were matched up with race-matched teachers and mentors. All right. Similar study, it just focused on, this is through K through 12, right? Focused on the impacts of particular race-based matching in the K through 12 system. And it found that overall, that there were some, maybe not as strong correlations as we saw in the previous study, but that scores on standardized tests for those students that were race and ethnic matched were significantly higher, all right? And they had better behavioral outcomes associated with in-classroom performance. So both at higher education, at the higher education level, when we think about, post-secondary and in K through 12, it seems to be significant difference here in these two studies as it relates to just the benefits of this race matching, all right? So the next thing that we think about here is student support services. So we've talked about a number of points here that are important, again, to kind of increase diversity and retain diverse students inside your program. And having, once they're here on campus, providing support services is going to be a critical one. Now, this particular point, there's a lot to cover here, but I'm going to try and isolate it down to specifically peer mentoring. All right, so I've talked about this idea of building social capital, and we know that one of the best ways to do that, as we've already seen in some of the research examples, is to get students in front of students that have the same lived experience. So this one here, this example is really pretty impressive. So this first year, this is a chemistry laboratory. They had some problems with retention year over year in terms of dropping out, but they went to kind of a model that included peer mentors in a cohort program, and they were able to increase student retention by 20% year after year just by implementing this kind of simple peer mentoring program. They even highlight here the program is uncomplicated and requires just modest resources, right? And significantly increased STEM retention in this particular program. I have to erase this. All right, here's another example for peer mentoring and social capital gain. All right, so this was a study that focused on a Hispanic serving institution, all right, where they looked at about 450 students, and they were matched with mentors over 3 years. And then they analyzed that data, and they found that the mentees reported increased university integration and post-testing significantly greater than the non-mentor students. And so this is akin to what we talked about earlier about engagement and how they can make a huge difference. And where students are engaged and they're integrated into the community, they're much less likely to drop out and stay and complete their degree. And this type of peer mentoring can make a huge significant difference in that, as this study kind of articulates, especially with this minority population. This is the last one here, and this is kind of a well-known study at the University of Texas, El Paso. I'm sorry that this rendered kind of badly, but I'll hit you through the highlights here. We can see at the very bottom here that what happened is that they went from they had a very significant problem with retention year after year, especially from first to second year, which is very common. All right, so they went to a community-based model, right, which included peer mentors of older students inside the program, right, coming and speaking with new students and developing those relationships over time. All right, so this is a population university that had over 80% was Hispanic. And if we can just go all the way down to the bottom, they did some other things too about applying kind of active learning concepts and immersing them into research. But peer mentorship was one of the things that they developed in the community. And let me just highlight this down here. And again, I'm sorry, it's a little hard to read. but we saw that their retention rates by implementing these series of programs nearly doubled from 43% to 80%. And then the average time for graduation decreased by almost 2 years. That is an amazing improvement. This is a holistic change. They did a lot of things here, so it wasn't just peer mentoring, but a big key of it was getting those students in front of other students and trying to help them develop those relationships and be integrated and supported into the campus. And then it really had just a dramatic impact, as we can see, in terms of retaining those students. All right. Students' life support. Okay, so I think I flipped that around. But anyway, these are the final things here that we do need to think about, not just kind of this peer mentoring. I just want to hit some more of these highlights, that there are real financial concerns. And so we're thinking about private partnerships in the terms of scholarships, and then also kind of reduced tuition rates inside the school. And then, academic, we really do need to get them tutoring. And I had some success in the past in terms of developing interest networks around specific topics. And that might be, neuroscience or biomedical medicine, whatever that might be, to get those students together and then start just talking about those concepts through shared interests. One that has a tendency to work really well is social good and sports, actually, when we think about the specific instances that might occur in data science programs. Okay, the last one here is about pedagogy. All right, so we've kind of gone through the opportunities that we have in data science, where we're at for that, right? We've gone through how to develop these 2-year relationships and some techniques associated with how we can support these students. But it's also important that we think about just not, the environment to get them here, and then all of the support services, but also what happens inside the classroom. So there's a lot of research that associates active-based learning to improve retention and especially in minority and first-generation students, right? This is an example here, all right, that talked about a program associated with underrepresented minority students that proved to show significant increases in terms of their ability to just retain in the course, and then also to perform as compared to when they did not implement this active-based program. There's about 250 students in this particular one, and it supports, as it says on the bottom there, a significant amount of research that that active-based pedagogy really does help with inclusive teaching and pathways for a diverse STEM workforce. All right. This one should be behind the one before it, but I can just tell you that it's the same as this particular one here. I just wanted to highlight this again, because one of the things that they did, and again, in this well-known study at the University of Texas, El Paso, is that they immersed students into research projects right from the beginning. So they were problem-based labs, and they were supported with faculty, and they actually worked them through a research process as one of the first things they did when they got on campus. So as compared to maybe just kind of, these are the electives you have to take your first year that every student takes, they immersed these students into a community-based learning environment and then had them in there doing training, very hands-on, applied, active learning-based methods, doing problem-based learning and research experiences right in their first year. And that, again, contributed to this significant difference in retention year after year, almost doubling. Okay, so active learning well, there it is. So I put it up kind of without it. All right, this is a duplication. And just to emphasize this, so we're trying to do some things here at the school. We've submitted a lab to the President's and Provost Fund for a data science active learning lab. As one of the project goals here, we wanted to kind of encourage the creation of cultural norms as it relates to how data science is taught, especially in the undergraduate space, right? With a proven benefit to improve outcomes for underrepresented groups and first generation students. And the idea is that we want to take this content, about how we can create these kind of activity-based labs and learning structure and just make it free and open, right? To encourage other data science undergraduate programs to take these things and implement them. All right. So if we know that they work, not only they work for minority and first generation and underrepresented groups, they work for everybody, right? So student performances in terms of learning outcomes appear to be clearly linked to this type of pedagogical approach, but especially as it relates to these groups of students that we're thinking about. So this is one of the ways that we're trying to develop this kind of as a cultural norm in the school, and then hope to encourage this type of activity outside the walls at UVA. We also have a Collaboratory for the advancement of education and data science. It's called KEDS. All right. And so the goal here is to really facilitate an opportunity for UVA faculty and students to work together, right? Engage not only in data, but also partner with the schools as well. And so this is related to all the things that we talked about, trying to get students involved in research partnerships as much as we can. And then we're also focusing on projects that kind of directly related to some of these goals. And then over the summer, as an instance, I have 3 undergraduate students that are going to help me on these projects that we're doing as part of the Collaboratory. And we're really just getting started. So we're hoping to have, kind of a robust portfolio of projects that are in the education space that we can engage students in, that will not only increase, their engagement just on campus, but also that the outcomes of these particular research projects could benefit the field at large. Given the time constraints, I won't get into the details of the 2 of those, but also this is our view of data science. I'm happy to ask questions about this, but we see it as very balanced across these 4 pieces. And this is the way that we're designing the undergraduate programs. Analytics is typically what people think of when they think of data science. It's machine learning, statistics, designs associated with communication of data science tools, and actually the designing of kind of human-centered design products. Systems is everything we need to be able to do the data science. It's everything from coding to high performance computing to cloud-based systems. And then value is kind of what we think about as the ethical and policy elements associated with data science and how we use these algorithms ethically and think about the human impact. And practice, as you might suspect, is how we put it all together. So this is how we're designing the programs as a whole. And then this is kind of what the actual program in the undergraduate looks like. Happy to ask more questions about that, but I'm trying to leave it at a high level. The concentrations will be in each one of those domain areas, which is another, I think, unique feature. So students can see themselves, if they have a tendency to be less computational or less computer science oriented, that we have design and ethical elements associated with this field. Right? So we're trying to keep it as broad as possible, which is another tenet we think that would lead to increased diversity of the students coming into the undergraduate program. So with that, that's it. Thanks.
Brian, thank you so much. Obviously, you're leading the effort here at UVA to build these curriculums, and frankly, this is just the first. I'm sure we're going to see these popping up all across the country, and recruiting diversity into them is vitally important. And you touched on a number of different areas. I'm curious about the possible recruitment opportunities that may also exist that maybe you didn't touch on. For example, reaching out to historically Black colleges and universities to see if there's interested in kind of cross-pollinating students or any activities like that. I'm curious if you could comment on that. Also about, are there any organizations such as the Women in Data Science organization that possibly might be a way for greater, I don't know, for women to see data science as a possible career path for them? Maybe they're not quite used to it, but maybe there's a way through organizations such as that to kind of get the word out. And also at the level of high school, if you can catch people before they decide on where their college trajectory is, maybe there's a way to get more people there. These are just a couple different things that I wanted to see if you had some comment on.
Yeah, absolutely. So starting at the top, the HBCUs is a great, we've done that. We did that at GW a good bit. Actually, we partnered with them where we had research symposiums and we made sure to have, kind of representation from these, historic, Black and minority institutions. And that helped out a lot, right? And I think we all learned from each other. And I think there's opportunities to continue to do that through kind of dedicated programming, whether that comes in the form of summer research programs, or whether we even think about creating pathways for those types of students if they wanted to transfer into our program. I think that's an important thing to consider. And so, so at the K through 12, well, let me start with the kind of women in data science. Actually, I'm fairly lucky here at UVA because there's a pretty active kind of women in STEM and Latino in STEM club groups, but there's also these national groups as well. And we have a conference here, as you know, to support women in data science every year. And in thinking about these things, I think we're actually got a pretty good head start on kind of creating these cultural norms because of all this activity in the field related to getting more diverse voices in it. It's a nice time to be starting a program like this because you get so much support for this type of ideal. And a lot of that's already taking place. So some of this, outside of the actual creation of this undergraduate degree, I think when you think about, where it sits in the larger landscape, it's just a matter of making sure to engage in those and do it purposely. I think we're doing a pretty good job here hosting a conference every year relative to women in data science, but there's always certainly things you can do more. In the K through 12 area, we've actually started an Adam Donaldson. Adam has been working with the state of Virginia to develop kind of programming in the K through 12 space. I think that's like if not the current, co-frontier with undergraduate, we're certainly getting a lot of requests about how we can inject data science into that. And that would help us out tremendously, because the reason we have a 3-year degree and not a 4-year degree is we're worried that students are going to come to campus and not really know what data science is. And so we're trying to give them a year to understand that. And that's why they have to take a couple of data science courses their first year. But over time, if we can evolve the landscape of data science education or computer science and, computational methods in the K through 12 system, that would actually allow us to have a much, maybe even get a year back, right? Where we'd have a larger amount of space, bring in students earlier, and then push the curriculum even further. And so I know that initiatives are active in several states about that. And I think they're piloting a program next year that will focus on just kind of data science applied to finance very, very at a high level, to give students in the K through 12 experience, not just in data science broadly, but apply it to an area with which they might be interested. And there's a lot of nonprofit organizations. There's one in New York that's pretty well known that's doing that same thing and offering going around and offering in high schools and community colleges, right, where high school students can go and take classes, applied data analytics, data sports analytics courses, where they can get kind of minority students or underrepresented students kind of excited about these applications through the domain of sports, which seems to be working pretty well. Yeah,
that's great. It's which kind of brings me to, in measuring postgraduate job success. So we've provided this education, and we have women and minority data scientists are charging out into the workforce. Are we prepared to measure their job success? And one of our participants asked, what is the optimal or equitable representation, in your opinion, of the minority groups in the data science workforce that we should strive to achieve?
Well, we wanted to mirror the general population of them in the US, right?
Yeah.
So from an economic standpoint, we can think about a population of those that are actively seeking work. We know what the demographics of that are. And there's no reason that STEM careers shouldn't mirror that. Many of the opportunities, especially as it relates to generational wealth and success, come through STEM education. And we know there's research that supports that idea. And so for us to have disproportionate, minority groups that are working in that is a concern across the board, right? Even for the future, what we think about kind of economic, benefits of those groups. So I think that should be the minimum goal. And then, I think we should think about, what our real aspirations are to try and excel at. Part of the problem is that we're doing fairly well when you think about just diversity overall in terms of people going into either 2 or 4-year degrees, but retention is still such a huge problem. We still lose, like on average, 30% of all college students drop out every year, right? And it's higher for minority students and first generation students. It's like closer to of that population, they make up an unbalanced percentage of it, a higher percentage. And at 10 million students a year, that's 300,000 students that are either withdrawing or going to part-time or removing out of the education system. So, I think that's a big problem. So we need to fix that. So why a lot of this talk was focused on not just identifying and getting in the pipeline, but how can we support them appropriately to increase and make sure that they persist. So I think that's the first step in trying and balance that out. And when we think about post-graduation success, there are some programs that do very well with this, and they keep track of their graduates over more than like a 10-year period. The data science field, I think, is fairly, even though it's just young, right? So it's only been around for really, in a very robust way, probably less than like 6 or 7 years. But I think we need to start thinking about, it's a good point, about what it means to be successful after graduation. And then what does it mean to be, generationally successful, especially for first generation students, or their children then moving on and having college success, is an important economic indicator of upward mobility, this kind of generational social capital that gets passed down from graduates to graduates. So hopefully we can kind of think about that, but it's a good point.
Brian, are there any other kind of lessons learned about what does not work in promoting diversity?
Yeah, so it's a good point. This is all about what does work. I think, I think being passive doesn't work. I'll just say that. I think that you really have to be aggressive and go out and try and recruit these students. I think in a lot of ways we've set up scholarships. When I was at GW, we had some scholarships that were available, but the bad part about it is that we didn't end up using all the money, and that's because students weren't even aware that it was there. Mm-hmm. Right? So you really got to get, you got to get out your shoes and hit the street. I mean, develop these relationships with the two-year schools, like go into high schools and let people know the availability. You have to rely on your institutions for some of this. But I think, and the other thing that is important is to experiment, right? I mean, a lot of the studies that we showed here, they made kind of dramatic changes and then tracked and saw what worked. There's a lot more studies that probably don't get published where they tried things and didn't work either. But I think it's important to have kind of an experimental, approach to this to see what works. But I think the most important thing is to just not be passive. We had a really nice program at GW when I was there that was funded through the NSF. One of the examples of maybe something that did work as compared to the billions that didn't, where any student that went through community college there, Northern Virginia Community College, and got an IT degree, got admitted automatically, and their tuition was paid for to come into the GW Information Technology Bachelor's. And if they got through that program, then we would pay for their master's in data science, so that we could go to the Northern Virginia Community College and say, if you make it through this, your GPA is 3.0, you make it through this program, you get into the bachelor's one, we'll pay for that. And if you make it through that, then we'll pay for your master's program. And that was great. We had a ton of success recruiting students to go through that pipeline. And that was all supported through NSF, but we couldn't just put it up on a website. We had to go out there and actively recruit. And it's hard. I mean, students are afraid to go through these things. They're afraid of failure. It's high risk. And they have, to be honest, I think that a lot of people come from environments where, it might actually not even be encouraged, right, to pursue this type of thing. And so there's a lot of hurdles there to get over. But I do think that getting out there and making meaningful relationships, a lot of what we talked about in terms of developing kind of that social capital is critical. It just doesn't work unless you're out there and kind of build those pathways and with purpose.
Are there any, in kind of, I guess it's almost like an intangible, but maybe it's measurable. Are there any examples of where increased diversity of the technical workforce on any particular problem in data science, AI, machine learning, where increased diversity has reduced biases that are present in AI and data set algorithm development or in data collection or the presentation of results from AI, machine learning algorithms? I know that seems a little nebulous, but I'm just kind of curious if there's an actual payoff in terms of the robustness, the reliability, and the suitability of kind of the answers that we're getting from AI technologies based on diversity.
I don't have any studies that I can point to that quantifiably say yes, but I have had a lot of conversations and people may be familiar with this name with Kathy O'Neill, and she talks about kind of implementing these kind of ethical frameworks, and she wrote a well-known book called Weapons of Mass Destruction. But that kind of idea, like to inject that, actually comes typically from kind of a social science background. The idea is to think about the human element associated with how the model will be implemented, or how can it go wrong, or what are the things we can control and not control. And that type of like quasi-experimental design, like on the front end, has a tendency to come from social science backgrounds. And those, as we saw in some of these slides ahead, especially as it relates to women, have a tendency to be much more diverse. So, I mean, it might be a leap of faith, right, to suggest that is true. But I mean, if you kind of walk that line of logic back, we know that having a thoughtful, putting the science back in data science, if you will, kind of this, approach to foregrounding the problems, and then using some of these ethical frameworks that are already there is something that is probably much more, I would say, normative, right, in some of the less harder sciences. And so kind of the more human-centered social sciences, which have a tendency to be more diverse. So the answer to the question could be yes.
Yeah, Nicole suggests that Scott Page has written a bunch about the quote unquote diversity bonus and how one might quantify it. So for anybody who's interested, that might be a place to look. Any parting comments for us, Brian?
Thanks for your time. If you want to follow up or have questions about any of these things, I love talking about it. So I'd be happy to dig in deeper and, just reach out. But that's it.
He will be, he is one of our mentors. For those of you who are taking part in our innovation lab next month, Brian is one of our mentors. So you'll get a lot of chance to interact with him and ask him a lot of questions and have some hopefully really deep conversations about how to boost diversity and equity in data science and how we can kind of think about ways to make that pay off. Brian, thank you so much for a really great discussion about how we can infuse diversity into undergraduate data science education, such an important topic. Again, I hope everybody will reach out to him. So thank you so very much. Everyone, this concludes our series of the data science, biomedical data science seminar series. And I want to thank all of you who've joined us each week. I want to thank all of our speakers who've done such a fantastic job. Everybody can find their talks on YouTube, and hopefully you will watch them again. You'll share them. You'll use them as foundational content for our Innovation Lab next month. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, I hope this is an important resource for you. It's always a joy when people approach me kind of randomly and say how much they've enjoyed watching the seminar series and how much they get out of these videos. So thank you so very much. And I certainly would be remiss if I did not say thank you to Gina Kamdar and to Hannah Reichel, who have made they just make this run like a Swiss watch. It's really fantastic to have them helping me every day. And so for those of you who are taking part in our Innovation Lab next month, we really look forward to seeing you. We are so excited to do this in person. I cannot tell you. In the meantime, everyone have a great weekend. Have a great summer. We'll be starting our Innovation Lab, our Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series once again in the fall term, the topic of which will be to be determined, but watch this space. And we hope to be able to come up with a number of other fantastic speakers to present to you. So thank you, everyone.